Hi, I'm Mark Regev, here in Jerusalem for another episode of Israel Undiplomatic, and I'm speaking to my co-host, Ruthie Blum, who this week is in New York City. How are you today, Ruthie?
I'm good. I have a bit of a cold, so you'll excuse my voice. I'm okay, except I'm very worried about the impending hostage release / ceasefire deal with Hamas. That sounds a lot like capitulating to the terrorists rather than defeating them.
So I beg to disagree. Everything I know tells me that this is the deal that's been on the table for months. I think actually Blinken himself said it in his famous interview to the New York Times, his farewell interview. He said that what's on the table is basically what President Obama put on the table. I think it was in May 2024. This was accepted in principle by the Israeli government, and it was always Hamas that said no, no, and no. Finally, because of the pressure Hamas has been under, because of the military defeat Israel has inflicted on Hamas and its allies, Hamas today is under immense pressure to accept the deal. There's Trump's comments about, all hell will break loose unless there is a deal. I think this is also affecting some of the people Hamas talks to, like the Qataris and the Egyptians. And there's now an impetus for a deal that basically Hamas is the one that has capitulated and that has accepted terms that they refused to accept up until now.
Yes, but it's not, Hamas is a terrorist organization that, by the way, has been stealing the humanitarian aid, selling it at exorbitant prices to Gazans who need the aid, and then with that money has been recruiting a whole slew of terrorists to replace the ones that Israel eliminated. That's number one. Number two, another disappointment I have is that President Trump, President-elect Trump, said last week about 4 times, if Hamas doesn't release those hostages, all hell will break loose in the Middle East. Okay? This is not all hell breaking loose. This is, okay, let's have a deal. Now, I am hoping that the reason that suddenly Trump is sounding different and is sounding more like Biden than Trump, and that the reason Prime Minister Netanyahu is agreeing to something that sounds insane and sounds nothing like what he would have agreed to at one point, is that there's something going on behind the scenes. And my theory about what might be going on behind the scenes is that Trump said to Netanyahu, look, just agree to this deal. I mean, Hamas is small fry. The real, the head of the snake, as we all know, is Iran. So if you just do this and we can get as many hostages out as possible, I will give you the green light and the necessary weapons, if you need them, bunker busters, etc., to go after all of Iran's nuclear facilities and hopefully also assassinate all the Ayatollahs, which would then free the Iranian people as well.
So I don't know. I think maybe it's quite possible that they've got this new administration coming in Washington. We know that basically the new administration is very positively disposed towards Israel. We know that from Trump's first term in office, where he took a series of steps that were very much appreciated by Israel. I mean, he recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. No American president had done that, and he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized the Golan Heights as part of Israel. No American administration had done that before. He took out Soleimani, the leader of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, calling him a terrorist. He broke out of that very bad nuclear deal that was done by the administration before him, the Obama administration. He did the Abraham Accords peace agreements. I mean, he did all these things that Israelis were very thankful for. So he enters office now, and he has a very positive reputation in the state of Israel. But I think we also need to know that gives him leverage. That gives him a certain influence. A new president comes in, a powerful president comes in, a man who's a very strong leader, and Israeli prime ministers and Arab leaders are going to be very, very attentive to what he's saying. And as you know, his personal envoy for the Middle East met with Netanyahu in his office in Jerusalem. And it's clear that this prisoner release is something that Trump wants. It's not just a Biden deal, it's a Trump deal. They want this issue behind them.
That's true, but this envoy knows nothing about the Middle East. He knows negotiating deals, like Trump's art of the deal. What surprises me is that Trump is sounding very different from the way he sounded last week. Saying, let's get this deal done is not the same as saying those hostages better be returned or all hell will break loose in the Middle East. So it's puzzling, okay? And every Israeli has been waiting, with bated breath for Trump to be inaugurated. And then suddenly he's sort of, taking up where Biden left off. And by the way, this envoy apparently was nasty to Prime Minister Netanyahu.
I don't know about that. But I do know this. I remember in a previous conversation that we had in a previous episode of Israel Undiplomatic, I said, and I firmly believe it, parts of the Israeli right have been celebrating Trump. They almost see him as some sort of, American messiah. And I think they're wrong. Trump is pro-Israel. But the idea that, here's the agenda of Israel and of the Likud, and Trump's going to sign on the bottom line, that's clearly not true. Trump is first and foremost an American president. He'll put America first. He's got some good instincts when it comes to the Middle East, but the idea that he's going to automatically endorse all the positions of the Israeli right, I think that's an illusion. I'd remind you of a number of facts. Number one, the famous Trump peace plan of 2020. It involved the creation of a Palestinian state, which is, of course, an anathema for many, many people on the Israeli right and many Israelis across the board, actually, today, after the terrible massacres of October 7th, 2023. But more than that, the president-elect took phone calls from world leaders. He also took a phone call from Abu Mazen from the Palestinian Authority. Right? The same Abu Mazen who's not talking to Israeli prime ministers spoke to President Trump on the phone, and the president had agreed to take that call. And so I think when he comes to us, we know he's favorably disposed, but the idea that he won't, on occasion, have positions that are going to be difficult for Israel to digest, I think that's an illusion. Of course, he'll at times come with requests that it'll be difficult for us to say no to that won't necessarily be our predisposition.
Well, I'm sorry. It's in America's interest to eliminate terrorism. So, and we know that Trump has, of all his other, he's a little bit erratic and all that, but his moral compass has been really in the right place. So that's why I say there must be something going on behind the scenes. The fact that he took a phone call from Abu Mazen, that's not a problem. He had said all along when he was president the first time, he said all along, you want to join us? You're welcome. We'll help you. We'll help you reform your society, et cetera. You don't want peace. You want to keep funding terrorism. Then I'm shutting the door in your face. Okay, so that was actually consistent, both with Trump's character and American interests and Israeli interests. The left had always believed that the only path to peace in the Middle East was via a Palestinian state. And Trump came along and understood that was baloney. So also the Abraham Accords that he brokered, though there was some, talk of a path to a Palestinian state, the Palestinians had no part in those accords. They were told, you wanna change and you wanna join, you're welcome. Otherwise, stay away. We are not interested in you. And that was beautiful. That was the main point. Today, and that was before October 7th, 2023. So our positions have to be hardened. That's why. Now, I don't know what Trump is up to, of course, but his envoy, it was reported in an Israeli newspaper that envoy called Netanyahu's aides on Saturday to say, I've come to Israel from Qatar, where, by the way, he praised the Qataris for doing the Lord's work, which is in itself horrifying. The Qataris are house Hamas. They're a terrorist entity themselves. It's just some Lord's work they're doing. They're not doing any Lord's work. That's one thing. Secondly, what was reported in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz is that he phoned Netanyahu's aides and said, I'm coming from Qatar to Jerusalem. I need to meet with Netanyahu. And they said, okay, but it's the Sabbath. He'll be available at sundown, Saturday night. And then Witkoff, his name is, said, oh, don't give me that. We know that Netanyahu turns on light switches on Saturday. He better get his ass over here to meet with me. So if that's true, we don't know if that's true, but it was reported in one of Israel's major newspapers, the way the details of this deal have been reported. So that was very, very disturbing, because Trump's other picks for many other positions are wonderful and never would have said that to Netanyahu, ever. And they certainly wouldn't have said that Qatar was doing the Lord's work.
So this is a new envoy, and I think one has to presume that he's doing what his president, his commander-in-chief, wants him to do. And that's why I say we have the right to be hopeful about Hamas's attitude towards the Middle East. I think, as we've said, his instincts are good on a lot of these issues, Ruthie.
You mean Trump?
Trump's. Yeah, but once again, his team is working for him, and the idea that somehow this is one bad actor on the Trump team, I think I think the Trump attitude towards us will be very interesting. But it's not just Israelis who are basically positively disposed towards Trump and are willing, I think, to go the extra mile for him, and rightly so. Across the Gulf, they are too. Many people in the Gulf were very critical of Biden. They saw him as weak. They saw him as ineffectual. They saw him as, especially when he's trying to get a deal with Iran, they thought he was on the other side. Trump comes and he's liked in the Gulf. And that's why I think Trump could be very useful, maybe, in expanding the Abraham Accords and getting other Arab countries, specifically Saudi Arabia, to join the circle of peace. And I'm thinking maybe one of the reasons that Trump wants this hostage deal, because he knows getting the hostages out and getting some sort of ceasefire in Gaza is a way to create a climate for the restart of the expansion of the peace process. And he can use Saudi Arabia in Gaza in a positive way and help push Hamas out.
Well, that would be fine with me, okay? It would be fine with me. They're expanding the Abraham Accords would be great. Having Gulf states take some role in ruling Gaza after the war, if this deal doesn't prolong the war, that is, okay, that's another question. But but what I'm saying is that no Palestinian entity or leader should have any role in ruling Gaza, or for that matter, the West Bank, in other words, Judea and Samaria. They are terrorists. They're terrorist entities. We have to stop encouraging that, stop fantasizing that they're different or have reformed. They have not. And as long, by the way, as the humanitarian aid, if it is true that this deal means even increasing humanitarian aid, all we're doing is enabling Hamas to stay in power. How is that possibly a good ceasefire deal?
So you are correct when you say that if international aid to Gaza is being distributed by Hamas or by Hamas's proxies, that's a way for them to stay in power. So I hope now that the ceasefire will be kicking in on the assumption that there is a deal, and at the time of we're speaking, which is early afternoon in Israel on the Wednesday, but on the assumption that this deal is there, I am sure thought has been made about how delivering the aid can be changed to keep Hamas out of the process, that it shouldn't be the way the international community is actually inadvertently trying to keep Hamas in power by having them distribute the aid. It gives them amazing power, political patronage, the ability not only to make money, as you say, by selling the aid, but the ability to manipulate public opinion, and everyone has to be loyal to them because they're handing out the goodies, so to speak. But I think that sort of thing has to be thought through. And I think it doesn't in itself make a bad situation. What I am saying is that if the ceasefire does kick in, and I hope it does, it creates a new dynamic, which hopefully can lead to changes in Gaza. It can lead, as of course, to get hostages out. I hope all of them. I think there is room here for cautious optimism that we can achieve our war goals together with this ceasefire arrangement. I'd remind you also, right, that the lessons from Lebanon, where we agreed to a ceasefire weeks ago, and every time the other side has done something that we think, breaks their commitments, we act. And I have no illusions it'll be the same in Gaza. If the Hamas starts doing things that are contrary to what has been agreed on, we will act and act decisively.
The difference, however, between Lebanon and Gaza is that according to this ceasefire deal, again, if the details we've been reading are correct, the IDF is going to retreat from the Netzarim corridor, which means, and enabling Gazans to move back up to northern Gaza from the south. If there are tons of Gazans in northern Gaza, we are not going. You think that anybody's going to let us then go back in there and start bombing again? In Lebanon, southern Lebanon was basically evacuated. You see, so when we say, okay, we see movement in Lebanon, terrorist movement, weapons, missiles, etc. We've been bombing specific targets. But northern Gaza, that we still haven't been able to completely finish with the terrorists there and the booby traps and the tunnel shafts. You think that we're going to drop a 2-ton bombs on a civilian population that has moved back, that is also intermingled with terrorists? We're not going to do it. We've tried so hard to avoid killing civilians. And of course, Hamas wants to intermingle with the civilian population so that civilians get killed, so that Israel gets blamed. That's what's different with Gaza, and that's why I'm very skeptical about the ability to go back in there. Furthermore, as I said, it seems there's nothing in this deal that prevents Hamas from remaining in power. And Mohammed Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar's brother, has been running the show there. So all I'm saying is that I'm very skeptical unless all of this is a way of saying, no, we are now going to tackle the head of the snake, and that's Iran. And in that case, it is true that Hamas becomes secondary, because at once you strangle Iran and the mullahs, you have also strangled Iran's proxies.
So I think that's possibly part of the understandings between Trump and Netanyahu, the idea that something has to be done about Iran. And I think that Netanyahu would be right to show flexibility on Gaza in order to reach those big agreements with the United States. I don't know if that's part of the deal, but it makes sense to me that in Netanyahu's thinking, the new American president has the ability to help us with Iran, has the ability to help us make peace deals with additional Arab countries. I think he would be right. I mean, you can't be overly flexible. You can't compromise on Israel's fundamental security, national security. On that, you've got to stand firm. But on issues where you can be flexible, we should be flexible. On this deal to get the hostages out of Gaza, is it also not possible? I mean, Ruthie, you follow the news as closely as I do, maybe even more than me. We had a whole bunch of Israeli casualties this week, right? In my own community of Modi'in, we had another soldier buried this week who was killed in Gaza. And is it possible now that we're at a situation in Gaza where there's the law of diminishing returns? We've destroyed Hamas's military machine almost totally. Our forces have had amazing successes there in defeating terrorism. And that maybe now, law of diminishing returns, we're going to continue paying a high price, but with less result. And that maybe through a political channel, which will be established by a ceasefire, which will allow others to come in, is it possible that this is going to be the way that we create something new in Gaza, not Hamas?
Well, I'm skeptical about that, of course. But I will say there's the other side of what you just mentioned about all the fallen soldiers, is that so many parents of fallen soldiers are beside themselves with this deal, saying, well, if this is the deal, and again, it's not even all the hostages, okay? It was certainly not in the first phase. But these parents of foreign fallen soldiers are saying, really? So all that was in vain. That's how they are feeling, that the loss of their sons and daughters was in vain. And I understand why they feel that way, because yes, you're right. The more the soldiers get killed there while we're sort of what you call full gas and neutral over there right now. Okay. But all of that also had to do with our taking extreme care not to kill civilians, and with the Biden administration tying our hands and withholding weapons and all of that. And all along, I've been saying the one thing that the Trump administration will not do is tie Israel's hands. So I am hoping that that's not what's happening right now, because if it is, I will have to change my position. And as I said, I've been a real champion of the incoming administration. But if it begins to behave like the Biden administration, which I hope and assume it won't, but if it does, I will be extremely critical.
I teach foreign policy at Reichman University here in Israel. And I know that, when governments change, foreign policy usually doesn't change 180 degrees, yes? There's always a certain amount of continuity. And that, but Trump is Trump, yes? But you see in this deal where we've seen Trump's negotiators working in tandem with Biden's negotiators to try to get this deal. And Biden wanted to do the deal with Saudi Arabia. Trump will want to do the deal with Saudi Arabia too. Not everything Biden is black and Trump is going to be white. There's going to be a certain amount of continuation. I think that's to be expected. Ultimately, governments have their own inertia and governments have their own bureaucracy, and not all the policies of the previous administration are necessarily wrong. What we can be is optimistic about Trump because, as we've said, his instincts are fundamentally good when it comes to Israel and the Middle East. He's respected here in Israel. He's respected in the Arab world. And I think he can be good. And as you said previously, he broke the circle which said, and many people believed it, that you can't have peace in the Middle East without first dealing with the Palestinian problem, right? That's the prerequisite. That's the key for peace. And the Abraham Accord showed no, that's no longer the situation. The Arabs are ready for reconciliation with Israel. The Arabs are ready to talk to Israel. They don't need a Palestinian authorization, a Palestinian kosher stamp to make deals with Israel. What they do need, and the Emiratis needed it for the Abraham Accords, they need maybe to tick a box, something that they can say at least publicly, well, we also took into account Palestine. They need to do that. And if we need to tick the box to get a deal with Saudi Arabia, I believe we should be able to do it too.
All right. But, I'm beginning to wonder why we need to even tick that box. Okay, those Arab countries can't stand the Palestinians, never help them, never do anything. I don't understand why lip service has to be paid to them. First of all, because language has meaning, rhetoric has meaning. And by the way, it wasn't many people believed that peace in the Middle East is dependent on Palestinian statehood. It's the left. And by the way, the Biden administration, you said, well, it's not all black and white. Yes, the Biden administration was a disaster domestically and in terms of its foreign policy. Total disaster. Now, how the new Trump administration has yet to prove itself. It hasn't even been instated yet. But as I say, I was criticizing, it's not that I am criticizing Trump for carrying the baton of Biden in terms of this deal. I'm saying that in Trump's own language, what he said last week is very different from what he's saying this week. I was only talking about from the horse's mouth. He said, if those hostages aren't released, all hell will break loose. He didn't say, if we kiss you, kiss your behind Hamas and get a deal and say, oh, thank you so much for releasing hostages and please sign a deal without even telling us who's alive and who's dead, and we'll give you thousands of terrorists or release them from jails. That is not how Trump sounded a week before this.
So
and that is what surprised me.
Ruthie, you shouldn't be surprised because in many ways, when you say remarks like, all hell will break loose unless the hostages are out, and then you send a negotiator to make it happen, to get the hostages out, that actually, you could say the tough language is augmenting the diplomacy. In other words, they actually work in tandem, though you could say they sound contradictory to an outsider, but actually in the region, people understand it. And if, let's say, the Qataris are now finally serious about pushing Hamas to get a deal, right? The fact that they hear the American president speak like that, that can be conducive. And so I don't see a contradiction at all.
No, of course it's conducive. But what's conducive about it is the demand that the terrorist entity that we all say has been decimated, has been, largely destroyed as a military force, etc. You dictate terms to it. That's the difference. You see, it has an effect when you say, okay, you lost, we won, now get down on your knees and beg to come away with as much as you can. Not, okay, now we kowtow to you and we let you dictate how many hostages or whether you give us a list of who's alive. That's my point. My point is, of course, when Trump said that, that was very, very important. And the military pressure that Israel has exerted is crucial. What is a mistake, in my view, is then turning this around to make it sound like there's some kind of negotiation between two equals. And if what we feel is we haven't actually beaten them and we need them to agree to terms, that's very worrisome and it sends a really bad message. And also, it basically guarantees that all those prisoners who will be released if this deal is signed, those terrorists, that we can expect another October 7th in the near future, the far future. I mean, this is not a way to eradicate a threat.
So releasing prisoners is always a problem. And there's talk, once again, we haven't seen the deal yet. We're only talking on the basis of press leaks, yes? But they're talking about some of the dangerous people can't go back to the West Bank, to Judea and Samaria. They can only go to Gaza or to third countries. But I agree with you. That's always very, very difficult. I'll tell you what also is difficult for me, Ruthie. In this first phase of the release, we're going to get 30-something people back. It's not clear they'll all be alive. And the fact that, theoretically, Hamas could release 20 bodies, right? Now, for the families of those killed, I understand their pain. I understand they finally get closure. I understand for them to have a loved one and to have a funeral, that's important. But it's not the same status as bringing people out alive. And we're not, neither of us are party to these negotiations, but I would hope that we're prioritizing live hostages over dead ones.
Well, certainly. I certainly hope that as well. But here's the thing. We're letting Hamas determine that. That's what I'm trying
So I
to
think
say.
maybe I understand what you're saying, Ruthie, but maybe, if as is being said, that this is the same deal that's been on the table for months now, and the Hamas refused it, and if Hamas is now accepting the deal as a result of the pressure it's under, right? It's not Israel's capitulation. This is Hamas's capitulation. And it all depends, like all other deals, it depends what happens after the deal. It depends what other actors do, and that Israel is very serious, that we will continue with our aims. And when this is over, not only will we get our hostages out, but Hamas will no longer govern the Gaza Strip. I think that's the most important thing.
Well, let's hope, because there's no guarantee of that. And the last point is, okay, so let's say in the first phase, 33 hostages, dead, alive, a combination of both, are not returned. What if 23 are? Does that mean, what do we do? Do we go in and bomb? Do we not?
I think so, yes. That would be a direct violation of the deal. And then as a result, we could once again restart military operations. And I think there would be understanding, especially from the new president. if he's taking credit for this deal, and he can if it happens, right? He can say he was one of the architects. He knows exactly what the guidelines want. If Hamas breaks the deal, I think Israel will have every right and every ability to go back in and finish the job militarily.
Okay, well, we'll see about that. I will just say that, as I said, I'd like to give it a chance because, as I've said all throughout the war, and I've said it on the podcast with you a few times, is that each time I doubted Prime Minister Netanyahu's policies or moves during the war, I was proven wrong, and I then said, "Oh wow, there were things going on behind the scenes that I didn't know about." So I'd like to wait and wait and see what happens because he has been throughout this war playing 3D chess, and so really I should be saying, you know what, let's give this a chance. It just can't be that that what we're seeing on the surface is all there is. So there's something else at work that we don't know about. And therefore, I will give it a chance despite my skepticism.
So I am with you on that. Let's give this deal a chance. Let's get some hostages out. Everyone who we can release from Gaza, that's a major thing. And we have to keep our eye on the ball and have no illusions about who we're dealing with in Hamas. They're not suddenly going to sign an agreement and become Boy Scouts. We have to look at them. We have to be very careful, and we have to be ready to use force again when and if necessary. And on that note, Ruthie, we've come to the end of our half an hour together. I look forward to speaking to you again next week.
Same. And I would like to remind viewers to please like, subscribe, and press the notification bell.